All right. Got a cool episode for you today. Today we're talking single swim baits. It's wintertime, it's cold. It's one of those baits that just catches fish all year round. But we're also talking about specific jig heads to pair up with your single swim baits to help you catch more bass. And joining us here shortly will be Bassmaster Elite Series Pro Jacob Fouts. And figured there's probably not many that are better at throwing this kind of thing. So we might as well get him on here and find out all the juice from him. But first, I want to say welcome to the Lure Lab, a part of the Serious Angler Network. This is episode 113. As always, I'm your host, the captain, Andrew Full. And big news this year. Omnia stepped up and is taking over the title for the Lure Lab. So big round of applause to the guys over there. We love working with Omnia. We've been with them for a few years now. And we're just excited to continue to expand that partnership and everything that they do with us here. So look out for all kinds of exciting things coming here in 2025 in regards to the Serious Angler Network, the Lure Lab partnership with Omnia, and also everything that we talk about today. If it is on the Omnia website, make sure you go down below, hit up those links, and type in Serious 10 at your checkout. That'll help you save 10%, and you can get there quickly by hitting those links down below. So, I've reached out to them before we did this episode and asked them for a juicy tidbit on what like some of the hot selling jig heads are for 2024. And the big one that they said to us was the Okashira head. So the juice of the week for you, before we bring Jacob on here, is the Megabass Okashira swim bait jig head. And without the props on it, it is one of the biggest sellers in the 1/8 ounce. So make sure you head over there. It'll be linked down in the description. So you can go over there and check it out. And I'll reiterate it again. Everything's down below at the end of the episode. So as you're going through and you see something you like, make sure you hit it. So without further ado, let's get Jake on here. And Jake, what's up, man?
What's up, buddy? How are you?
Living the life, snow globe and staying cold. How are things with you down there in Tennessee?
Oh, buddy. It's cold. We got 3 inches of snow. Everything's shut down. Crazy, huh?
I bet the fish were biting, though.
Oh, yeah. I was out today, and it was a pretty good time.
Yeah, I'm sure it's cold, but they love when the weather change. When the weather changes in the wintertime, right? Like, they almost don't like stable weather. They get lockjawed.
Yeah, like the nastier it is, typically the better they bite. But it just seems like here, for whatever reason, when it gets bitter cold, that they really, really bite. And anytime the water gets like 42 or colder, they really bite for whatever reason.
Or you catch them on a single swim bait.
I caught a few on a single swim bait.
So probably a trap too, I would assume, maybe.
Single swim bait, jerk bait.
Your winter stuff.
Just typical winter stuff. Yeah, nothing fancy.
Just having fun. I get that. So, there's so many different jig heads. There's so many different swim baits on the market, right? My question for you is like, why hasn't anyone made the perfect jig head for every single swim bait on the market?
It's just hard because you have all kinds of different styles. You got your ball head jig heads, and then you've got your football style jig heads. You've got your like darter style jig heads. So you can kind of pick one out and use one all around, but there's definitely jig heads that are better suited for certain situations. Which I think honestly that helps maximize your fishing time rather than, because not one jig head is perfect for every single situation. And if you can have several different styles that you like that you can use in all situations you might encounter, I personally feel like you're better off suited that way.
Yeah, if you had to choose one jig head for like every application, which one would you choose?
I would. So the one I use, more times, almost probably 90% of the time, it's made by owner. It's just called the Ultra Head. It's just the Ultra Head round head. Ultra Head round head. It's got the lockdown keeper. The keeper's kind of goofy looking, but with a little dab of super glue, and with whatever swim bait you use, that keeper does a really good job of keeping your bait intact, and it doesn't tear off, because a lot of soft body swim baits,
Yeah.
depending on what you use, have a lot of salt in them, and they tear pretty easily. So I've kind of found with that you can kind of maximize the durability.
Yeah, I love those ultra heads, man. That was an owner 5313 90
Mm,
degree jig hook that they put in. That's a pretty bad
yeah,
little hook.
that's
Yeah. The
yep.
only other one that I can say that I found that is close, maybe or on par, would be like the BKK jig heads and the ball heads and football heads. But I personally like a football head just because I drag bottom all the time. But you can't beat a round head either. It comes through rocks better than what you would think.
Yeah, it doesn't do a bad job at all. But like you're saying, a football head definitely seems to come through. I've found it comes through a rock way better than anything else.
Right. Yeah. And that was going to be the next question. I kind of answered it for you. I was going to ask you, when would you want to choose a football head over a ball head? But it's virtually just water column, I would assume.
Yeah, basically anytime I'm on the bottom, or if there's fishing around a lot of rock or something like that, then I'll gravitate towards a football style jig head.
Yeah. So now here comes this is the fun part, right? Like there is hundreds, probably hundreds, if you take all like the garage makers and name brand style single swim baits. Like if you fish tournaments and or fun, you probably have 4 or 5 different brands. I'm curious, like as you go through winter and water temp, like maybe what are your top 3 swim baits that you have, and do you have a favorite jig head that you pair with them?
Yeah, so for me, I really only use two different kinds of swim baits. Brand, brand, a full soft body. I almost 100% of the time use a Kitech, the Swing Impact, the Fat, and a plethora of different sizes. I use the only time I'm really not using that is when it's summertime and I got deep offshore in the ledges, and I tend to gravitate more towards a hollow belly. Hollow belly. Um, I just, for whatever reason, I like the hollow belly better when the water's warm and I can fish it fast with a heavy head. Um, the Kitech works great then too, but I just, for whatever reason, I catch bigger ones on a hollow belly in the summertime. But basically any other time of the year, I'm throwing a Kitech, just like the Swing Impact, the fat one, and size range from a 2.8 up to I think they make one in like 7 inches. I think.
Yeah, monster. I think it might even be 7, 8. It's
I
big.
think it is. I don't throw that size a lot. I go up to the 5.8 is
Yeah.
the 2.8 to a 5.8. The sizes I use the most, and probably I think a 4.4 is the one I use the most.
Yeah, it's either 4.3 or 4.4. That size
It
is
might be a 4.3.
it's a good size for just getting a big bite when
Yeah,
you
it's
need
just a
one.
it's just a good all around size. It's kind of a good mix in between being a little bit finessey and also being a bigger profile.
Yeah.
Um,
I want
but
to circle back real quick
yep.
I just said quack real quick to the hollow belly. Is Bass Trick still like the best one you can buy, or is there ones that you think are better now?
See, I've always used the Striking, the Shadowlicious.
Oh, those are good too. I always forget about those.
That's kind of what I've always used. I've not really used the Bass Tricks a whole lot, mainly because they're way too expensive for me.
Yeah,
And
that's a good
when they're
point.
biting them, hollow bellies. The way I rig a hollow belly, they get torn up pretty quick. Um,
It's
which
better to save money sometimes, you know. And if they're
yeah,
still getting bit, who cares?
yeah, and I haven't seen a difference in the amount of bites you get using a shadow issues versus a bass tricks. I don't personally think it
Have you
makes that
tried
big
the
a
Zoom
difference.
ones? Because I think Zoom
Uh,
made a hollow belly too, right?
yeah, the Zoom swimmer. I think that's what it called. I think that's what it was. Uh, I have a hard time getting that thing to swim at like if you're reeling it
Burning
slow
it.
along the bottom. I can't get the tail to kick.
Oh, that's tough. Tail needs a kick to get bit,
As that's the kind of the most crucial part of a swim bait.
Right. So, yeah, man. Do you have a favorite color Kitech by any chance, or do you just have a plethora that you
I believe
rotate?
it's called I believe it's electric shad. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, that's a good one. It's like that
It's
purpley gray
it's
flake
like
top one, right?
yeah, it's like purpley gray, maybe a little blue. Just a hard color to beat. Really, that's kind of my go-to here on the Tennessee River. They really enjoy it.
Now, before I say anything, because I don't want to get you in trouble, is Erie open for St. Clair?
I'm not sure. I'm sure it is.
Okay, so I won't say anything.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure before I said something that I shouldn't say. So
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I wasn't sure. Sometimes it's open, sometimes it's not. So we'll go on to the next question here. Do you mess around with like painted jig heads at all? Or do you just stay with the lead base that comes in the pack and ready to go?
Yeah, I just like a straight lead. I don't personally care for the a painted one. For no other reason than I've never had any problem getting them to bite just a standard lead one. Tungsten, I don't care for the shininess. I've played around with tungsten. I feel like I get less bites with tungsten. It's I feel like that's one of those things that probably doesn't make that big a difference one way or the other. It's more or less just a confidence thing for the angler as much as anything. It's some guys will tell you that you get more bites with a jig head that's got eyes versus one that doesn't. And, I've not seen where it's made that big a difference or has made a difference in catching fish and getting bites and getting no bites. So I don't. I just kind of use what's always worked, and I go by the mantra: if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I will say this on the shiny tungsten head. I find that they don't work great on cloudy days for whatever reason, that shine that it gives off. But I have found when it gets like slick, calm, flat, like nothing, no wind, bright sun. I have found sometimes if you go to like a super flashy swim bait, so like a sight flash with that shiny tungsten head, that it can kind of pull them and show them, at least if you're fishing shallow water, as opposed to getting them to chase a different color. And sometimes I get an extra bite, sometimes it doesn't. But I'm in agreement with you for the most part that a lead head just does fine.
And tungsten's
Like,
expensive.
oh god, it's so expensive when you get 2 in a pack for $5.99, or you can get 4 or 5 in a pack or pour them yourself, right? Like, and save a bunch of money. So yeah, when you're dragging bottom, you're probably better off with lead. And
Oh,
it's a little
100%.
softer, so it doesn't dig in as much.
Yep, absolutely.
So, throwing single swimmers, you can throw them on a spinning rod, you can throw them on a bait caster. What is your cutoff for throwing it on a spinning rod, and when will you pick up that bait caster?
A lot of it just depends on the size of the swim bait, really, for me. Anything less than a 4 inch, I'm probably going to throw it on a spinning rod. You get up into the 4.5, anything probably 4.5 inches and bigger, I'll throw on a bait caster. And it also will depend on the head size a little bit. If I'm throwing a 4.5 with a light head, then I'll throw it on a spinning rod. But if I'm throwing let's say a 1/4 ounce head or bigger with a 4.5 inch swim bait or bigger, I'm always going to throw it on a bait caster. Line size will just depend on that.
Yeah.
The application of whether I'm fishing shallow, deep, water clarity, things like that. But if I'm using a 1/2 ounce head with a small swim bait, I'll put it on a bait caster too, just because I can throw it a half country mile.
Yeah, I love throwing them on bait casters. Bailey, he loves the spinning rod with a single swim bait, and I'll be like, nah, screw that. I'm throwing a 7-foot medium or 7'2" medium with like 12-pound test, and you got your 10-pound braid to 6-pound or 8-pound leader, and I can just reel like it. Like, you can take your time with them. I'm just reeling, buddy. Like, you can get away with a slightly bigger hook. You can hit them harder. You land more fish, in my opinion. You might not get as many bites, but you don't lose as many because you're not having that tug of war, in my opinion. So I'm curious, what is your overall setup for both? Like if you're throwing it on a spinning rod, so like rod reel, line combo, and then the bait caster as well.
On anything on a spinning rod, I'm throwing it on like a 7.6 medium light. A good portion of my spinning applications now, I kind of I gravitate towards a longer rod. Basically everything, but any kind of bottom bait, like a Ned rig or a drop shot, I'll still throw on like a 6'10" or a 7'2" or something like that. But anything with any kind of moving bait on a spinning rod, I've gravitated towards a longer rod. It's always 10-pound braid to an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. Just a 2500 series spinning reel. I don't really ever change the line size. And then bait caster wise, that's where I'll almost always throw it on like a 7 foot. I mean, if I'm not throwing if I'm throwing a hollow body, it's going to be on a 7.6 heavy 20-pound line.
Fun.
With like a 3/4 or a 1 ounce jig head, out deep in the schools of fish. But any other application with we'll say like a 4.5 or a 5-inch swim bait, line size could vary from 20 to 12, just depending on when and where.
Yeah. How deep or the structure, etc.
Right.
If you want it over their head or below them.
Right. If I'm trying to get it deeper, obviously lighter line is better. And, size of the head, just, like I said, it depends on the application as well. Whether, if they're suspended over 40 foot of water, if they're suspended over 80 foot of water, 40 foot down, then I'll tend to gravitate towards a heavy head, or if they're running through bait just to be able to get it to them. But, same deal if I'm trying to get it on the bottom and they're deep, obviously you're going to need a heavier head just to be able to keep it down there. You just kind of, its size just kind of, it just, varies for different applications. You just kind of play it by for what it is.
Whatever the situation shows you, right?
Whatever the situation calls for, you got to kind of be ready for it. You might, a lot of times if I'm fishing a Highland lake, I'll have 3 or 4 different size jig heads laid out, and then I can either hurry up and tie on if the situation calls for it, or I'll have them all tied on and I can just pick them up and throw them whenever I need to.
That's one thing I have noticed, that when I am like on a single swim bait bite, I'm like, I always have 4 or 5 different rods rigged up with different weights, because you can fish them all at different speeds with not the same color, but not like a vastly different color. Because I find if you start getting way too funky with colors, you don't get bit. It's like if you want an electric shad, maybe you go to like a ghost shad, something that's not as like sparkly, right?
Right.
And some days they're on that one, and some days they want something that just has a ton of flake. It's kind of crazy. And then once you get dialed, then you can kind of all put them on the same. But I feel like if they're on a swim bait bite, they'll usually bite 2 or 3 colors in the same school.
Yeah, generally if they're on shad, you can throw, any shad pattern, any kind of shad pattern, and you'll probably be just fine. Or if they're on bluegill or perch or whatever it is, as long as it's looks somewhat similar, they'll probably bite. And it's something you can do. If you're just barely getting them, then maybe you can try just switch your color up a little bit. But a lot of times it's presentation as much as it is color.
Yeah.
It's either speed it up or slow it down, or just it's a lot. Most everything in fishing is just presentation. I think we as fishermen put too much. We put too much into in the color sometimes. I think are there times where it makes a big difference? Yeah, but I think a lot of times it's presentation as much as anything.
It's a great point. That it makes me laugh. Like you can walk down the aisle and they'll have, I'm just gonna throw it out there, I'm not calling Berkeley Power Bait out for an example, right? But like you could have 70 different colors of one bait, and if you stick to 2 or 3 of them of just general fish catching colors, you're probably gonna be okay.
Yeah, you'll be just fine.
And it's not just Berkeley power bait, right? Like,
Oh,
or
it's
Berkeley,
everyone. It's
it's
everyone
everyone.
now.
I mean, they got to sell baits to make money, and if they're going to
But
put out a new
hey,
special drop color, like people are going to buy them, right? Like,
listen, we're all suckers. You walk, we can't walk down a tackle store. You see a bait, you've always thrown. You're like, "Ooh, check this color out. I bet
yeah.
this would work."
You know what color they need? I think companies need to make more of is like motor oil. Remember how good that color was like 10, 15 years ago, and now you can't
I've
really
still
find it
got
at
some.
all?
I
Yeah.
still throw. I've still got some like Zoom Magnum tripworms and motor oil that I'll throw on a Nico rig in the summertime. And buddy, they'll like sometimes they'll come from like halfway up. Like your bait will be halfway down, and they'll come meet it and get it.
It's like the new
It's
age morning dawn. People don't realize how good it is still.
it's like all the quote unquote old school stuff is now the fish are starting to bite it like they've never seen it before. It's kind of crazy. I noticed that quite a bit this summer. Like especially on a single swim bait. Kind of the last 5 or 6 years they didn't bite it as good as they used to, and then this summer they kind of got back on the big, on the big crankbait, the big swim bait, just big football jig, just things that like in the last 5 or 6 years they didn't bite it as good as they used to.
You know why?
Because
It's because everyone's doing this now.
everyone's out there pinging that minnow, me myself included. That's my favorite way to catch one. But
Oh, it's so much fun. I always giggle like a little school kid, right? Like every time one comes flying up, I'm like, oh, here he
man,
comes.
it'll
And you
never
can
get
just
old,
tell.
dude.
You're like,
That,
yeah. You can
it'll
just
never
tell
get
which
old.
one's a looker and which one's gonna get it just by
You
like
can,
that first look,
just
right?
by the way just by their first interaction with your bait, you're like, oh, yep, that's a done deal.
Except for sometimes Great Lakes smallies will fool you, I found, because they will come up like a bat out of hell and just nope.
That's how some of our largemouth are. They'll come flying up off the bottom in the last second. They just hit the brakes. They're like, whoa.
Maybe not. Or they'll just like nudge
They
it. You're
just,
just
we're like, oh gosh, you sucker.
it's like, oh, that one. Like, it's funny. Like, I find myself like, oh, he's gonna get it. He's gonna get it. No, no, no. Like, stupid fish.
I just love it, dude. It's the anticipation as much as anything for me. You love it, hate it, whatever it is.
Yeah,
It's I think it's awesome. I enjoy the heck out of it. But
catching's
it's
catching. However you gotta catch him, just catch
hey,
it.
I don't discriminate. I'll catch them whenever. I like catching bass, buddy. I don't care if I got to put a key pole in the water with bamboo string. I don't care. I'll giggle just as hard either way.
Facts. So now, like, we're kind of talking about just like general swim bait fishing. I want to switch it up on you a little bit and dial it back in, right? Like, fishing current with a single swim bait is an entirely new, like, different dimension when it comes to it. So, like, what is your overall approach when you're actually going to like a heavy current situation, which, we have some big rivers in the Great Lakes that have big current. There's kayakers that fish rivers that have a lot of different currents. So these are all different situations, but even the TVA has a ton of current behind some of the tail races. So, like, what is your overall approach and setup when you're fishing current with a little bit deeper water with that single swim bait?
So fishing in heavy current can be really frustrating because the fish are related to the bottom because obviously they're not going to suspend in heavy current because they're not going to fight it. So that's when you're fishing heavy current, you're looking for any kind of current break or current seam, anything the fish can get into where they can just kind of hug the bottom and they're out of it and the current's washing everything to them. And this is where it gets tricky because this is where size head you use is the most important because you don't want a head that's too heavy and you're instantly stuck in the bottom and you're fighting the bottom, but you don't want a head that's too light that rides up in the current. You got to find that the head size that's kind of right in the middle where the current will almost float the bait right along the bottom and you're basically just keeping up with it and that thing's just bouncing along the bottom, the tail's going, but it's not digging in the bottom and it's also not riding up. So that's where you kind of got to find that middle ground. And the heavier the current, the more important that is. When the current's light, which that's not what you want when you're current fishing. Yeah, generally a heavier current's better. So that's kind of where an important head size where the head size is most important because, like I was saying, you want to find one that you can kind of just,
Hover.
I call it
Basically hover. Yeah.
hover, float it. What I call it, I say float it, where it just kind of just glides along the bottom, and the current just almost naturally takes the bait where you're not really the one that's doing. You're just kind of keeping up with your slack and keeping your line tight to where that tail kicks.
That's such a fun way to live. And like you can change your jig head weight based on like your line diameter too, because in current that's huge, right? Like if you're fishing 20-pound tests, that bait's probably going to stay way high in the water count because the current's going to grab it more. So you have to find that extremely fine line of what works and take every size jig head that you think might work in every line size, and you really have to mess around with it. And then if they jack the flow up higher or cut it lower, now you have an entirely new variable that you have to mess with.
Yeah, you're constantly adjusting, and it can be really frustrating because even when you do find the right jig head, you still find yourself hung up, a few times throughout the day, and you do go through some jig heads. So it's frustrating because, like you were saying, line size is a big deal. If a heavier line, a bigger diameter line is going to drift in the current more than say a light line. But at the same time, a lot of times when you're in heavy current, you're around some kind of rock. At least that's how it is here in Tennessee below our dams. It's nothing but rock, and you use too light a line, you are on the bottom, so your line's going to get frayed, and you don't want to constantly be breaking off when a fish bites. But at the same time, if you can if you can find the right size with the right size head with heavy line, you don't run the risk of breaking them off, but you're also fighting the current a lot more that way.
Yeah, and you also don't want to overpower the jig head to where it's riding like that, or overpower the swim bait so it's riding nose down the entire time with no tail kick. So that's another fun part of it.
Yeah, I found 15-pound fluorocarbon seems to be a pretty good safe bet.
Yeah, that's about where I was at. I'm like 14 or 15 in heavy current, like half ounce to 3/4 ounce head is pretty spot on even for out here.
Yep.
So if I'm fishing like shell or out in the open bodies of like open lake stuff, I might even go down to 10 if I'm fishing 40 foot to try and keep it down. But yeah.
Yep.
So, Jacob, here to wrap things up, right? Like, I want to know if you've messed around with any of like the sneakier heads on the market. Like, you have the Megabass Okashira head that Omnia said was one of the top sellers. There's that 6 cents like line through treble hook jig head. Like, have you messed around with any of those and had success?
See, I really haven't messed around with anything like that. Anything with any kind of blade on the head or anything. I've not really played around with it. Like I was saying earlier, I'm a bit of a creature of habit. When I find something I like, I typically
Perfect.
I don't really change it. If it's not broke, I try not to fix it, and as long as it keeps working, I try not to change it.
Yeah, I love that. So, last question here for you. I just wonder if you have any pieces of advice that you would give everyone who tuned into this episode to give them more confidence to go out and throw a single swim bait and catch some bass. What would you tell them?
Just it's just one of those deals. You got to stick with it, just like any lure, whatever it is, whether it's a jig, chatterbait, jerkbait, crankbait, whatever it is. If you don't tie it on and throw it and learn when and where to throw it, you're never going to gain the confidence to begin with. It's just whatever your favorite bait is. I'm sure when you started throwing it, that you didn't catch every bass you saw, or
I still throw baits and don't catch bass on them. So
yeah, so it's just like anything else. You got to throw it to gain confidence in it, and you can't go out there and throw it for 10 minutes and give up on it because you didn't get any bites. It's bass fishing. You gotta put yourself in the right area, and the only way you can do that is by throwing it. So it's one of those deals. You got to learn to not be discouraged, because, buddy, I still go out there multiple times a week, and I don't get many bites. So it's bass fishing. You got to have confidence in what you're doing, and you just got to believe that you put the time in, that you will figure it out, and you develop your own way of throwing a swim bait, however that is, your own little intricacies.
Yeah.
So it's just about putting the time in, and believing that you'll figure it out, because you will. You put the time in, it'll all click eventually. I promise.
Oh, it's funny. I can't tell you how many times I go out like scouting for fish in between guide trips. I'm like, Jesus, do I know how to catch a fish? And I'm like, just what is going on? And then you finally catch one, you're like, oh yeah, I missed that. Like, oops.
Yeah, generally, once every trip, I ask myself if I know what I'm actually doing or not.
You're like, why am I doing this for a living? Am I crazy, or did I just forget how to do this in this moment?
Maybe
No,
I'm not as good at this as I thought I was.
no, it's just bass.
It's
It's
just
just
bass.
bass.
They quarter-sized brain, and I don't think they know what they're doing half the time.
I mean, we can circle back to the current fish, though. Like current fish almost always eat. So, like, if you ever need a bite, it's like, oh, let me run in the current. Then you roll up, and then you're like, oh shit, they don't want to eat either. And they're like, yeah, I might as well quit.
Might as well just go home.
Because if they ain't biting in current, they ain't biting anywhere.
Oh.
Like, I'm convinced on that some days. Oh man, it's funny. So, well, Jacob, is there anything else here that you want to touch on before I let you loose here, my friend?
No.
Anything
really,
you think we may have missed?
no. I think the biggest thing is just enjoy going fishing, man. It's just bass fishing. Whatever your stance is on any of the issues that plague the fishing industry these days, buddy, just go enjoy catching bass, because there ain't nothing better.
Yeah, and it's pretty fun. I don't hunt, so I just fish. I bass and steelhead fish all year, so about 250 days. It's great.
I enjoy hunting, and but there's still nothing that gets me as fired up as catching a bass, and there ain't nothing that ever will. So
Yeah, you know what my issue with hunting is? If I was a deer hunt, I'd probably sleep 90% of the time and miss most of the deer. Because as soon as I sit down, I'm like, I start rolling back. So, quick story, real fast for you before you go. Bailey's brother was in, I think it was 2 summers ago, right before, like a couple months before his wedding. They're doing like wedding planning crap. And him and Bailey are on my boat. And I was like, oh, you can run the trolling motor. I was on like a 2-week straight grinder of guiding and getting my just ass beat out on the lake, right? Like 2 to 4 foot waves every day. I literally sat down behind the steering wheel at the console. He's got a picture of me just passed out as they're fishing. I was like, you got it. Like, and that would be me deer hunting. If I were to ever sit in a tree stand, I guarantee in a half hour I'd be sleeping and miss every big deer that walks by.
I do enjoy deer hunting almost as much as bass fishing. Same with turkey hunting. I enjoy those two almost as much as bass fishing, but not quite.
Yeah, fair enough. Everybody's got their own thing. I'm just not a hunter. I know I'd be sleeping. So, well, I appreciate it. I'm going to cut you loose here, and we're going to wrap up the episode. And I appreciate you taking the time here, coming on, and I wish you just as much luck as you had last year on the Elite Series, and go catch him up and have some fun doing it, man.
I appreciate it, man. I plan on having a bigger year this year than last year, so
go get it done.
We'll see what happens.
We're rooting for you, so
appreciate it.
All right, man. We'll chat soon. Thank you again.
Yeah, I appreciate it, buddy.
Of course. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning into this week's episode here on the Lure Lab. Like I mentioned before, everything that we talked about that is on Omnia will be linked down below. If you're new here on the YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. Leave comments down below what your favorite single swim bait is, or even your favorite jig head. Or if you just enjoyed the episode, maybe type in just a yes down in the comments. We greatly appreciate it. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform that allows you to leave a review, please do so here on the Lure Lab or the Serious Angler Network in general. That helps this network and podcast be seen by more people who are looking to learn more about bass fishing. Until next week, we will see you then.